All right, we're back. Tasty Crypto Show. I'm Dan Cecilia, and with me today, we've got Cole Kennelly, founder of Volmex and creator of the first tradable Bitcoin volatility indices, BVIV. Cole's a regular on the show and always brings us really unique insights about crypto volatility. Cole, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dan. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. Love having you on. Love chatting BVIV and the volatility indices. So let's just hop right into it. What's the current state of the crypto implied vol market? I know the BVIV index was recently mentioned in a CoinDesk article about sort of Bitcoin's boring price action, as they phrased it. But what do you think, this volatility environment means for Bitcoin?
Yeah, so crypto. It's an exciting time in crypto. Today, BVIV, so Bitcoin is at about 1,115. ETH is about 4,500, and the BVIV and EVIV indices, respectively, are about 30, 37, and 65. And so, sort of subdued volatility, implied vol for Bitcoin and Ethereum. These are kind of like local lows. I think that there's some reasons for that. The market's been sort of range bound. Some of the digital asset treasury companies have desks that have been selling options and suppressing vol, and so it's an interesting backdrop. You've had a lot of these Bitmine inversions. Obviously MicroStrategy, MetaPlanet, continuing to buy Bitcoin and perhaps run different yield things in recent weeks. So interesting backdrop. It's September 15th now. Seasonality, summer seasonality is kind of ending in crypto. So we'll see what the rest of the year holds. Should be a big last 3 months of the year.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely an interesting environment. It's definitely a really fun time if you're deep in the trenches and paying attention to the crypto markets. Even with the historically low volatility, price action on the majors. There's a ton going on outside of that, especially like on chain in the perps markets. But one thing you mentioned was the digital asset treasuries, the crypto treasury companies, how they're suppressing volatility. We've actually had a few other crypto options traders on the show and analysts on the show, and they specifically mentioned Saylor's MicroStrategy, that ATM sort of vehicle is actually dampening and suppressing volatility because there's no yield component to it, there's no staking component to Bitcoin. So the way they're creating these structures, they're basically buying Bitcoin and suppressing volatility. So just interesting to note that we're seeing that show up in the BVIV, the volatility index. So the CoinDesk article that I'm referring to, though, it mentioned that the index is close to reaching historic lows not seen since 2023. It's, right now we're looking at 36, 37 on the BVIV. That's indicating what, a 37% annualized vol, which is close to historic lows. Do you think we go lower, or do you think we're due for a spike?
So, really interesting times. I think that, so Volmex is sort of agnostic. We, are an index creator, and, we don't trade or take views, but my personal view is that, we're sort of at that point where vol can't really go too much lower. And, whether we see sort of a breakout in Bitcoin and Bitcoin goes to, say, 130, 150, we could see some positive spot vol correlation, or perhaps there's a move to the downside in Bitcoin and Ethereum. Although personally, I'm more bullish than that, but we'd also see probably a little bit of a move up in vol. So vol is definitely low right now. And, I think that, 36, 35, 30 handle for BVIV is largely, a pretty low vol. So it's a pretty exciting, backdrop for everything.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely think that, we have a couple events coming up on the calendar here. I know the 17th, I think, is it FOMC, or the interest rate, the Fed meeting is September 17th. And then October stands out as a significant date for Bitcoin implied vol. Are you tracking those catalysts? Is that something you guys, you think that could be like an indication for movement?
Yeah, I think FOMC is definitely, there's a big options expiry coming up as well. FOMC, uh, you know, if rates remain unchanged, might not have a big impact, but if there's a decrease in rates, and some sentiment and guidance regarding that, uh, we could see sort of a move in vol, and perhaps the market rallies on that rate decrease, and BVIV perhaps sees a move as well. October, I mean, I think generally, summer's over now. It's September 15th, as mentioned. Look, I think that we could see some just positive price action going into the end of the year. Um, you know, 150 seems like a nice round number for Bitcoin, and who knows what the future holds for ETH and some of these other assets like Sol. But we definitely could see some large, moves up in Bitcoin. There's a lot of buyers between DATs, and just the fundamentals are very strong. And so I think that it should be an exciting rest of the year. And if we see a rate cut or several rate cuts, I haven't checked the Fed now from CME in a little while, but it would be interesting to see, you know, how the market evolves.
For sure, yeah, and I guess I want to shift over a little bit and talk about some of the research you guys published around crypto ETF options positioning, specifically on IBIT and ETH. You guys put this out on your Twitter account. It was sort of, I think, a summary of some of the research that you guys do over there. But you mentioned that ETF positioning on IBIT and ETH, there's massive open interest growth. Which is signaling bullish, as you said. Is there any? What do you think traders are positioning for? That is it that run up into the end of the year? You think?
It's really interesting. So ETH and IBIT have seen massive growth in the options market in the last year or so, since they've been live for maybe 9 months. This just sort of signals a shift in market structure where, traders increasingly prefer to trade on, regulated venues that are, U.S. domiciled and backed by, a clearinghouse, and have, you know, perhaps just a lot of growing liquidity. Um, Things like IBIT and ETH are growing a lot. We're seeing that now. IBIT is about 70% of Deribit's open interest. There's a couple of different, positioning notes, but I mean that's one of the big takeaways is just that things are moving more and more towards the IBIT ETF options, which are highly liquid and strong counterparty regulated. Deribit obviously is a great firm and now part of Coinbase and has done awesome work over the years, but I think as more and more institutions and sophisticated investors and traders get involved in the crypto asset space, these IBIT and ETH option structures will continue to grow. And so really interesting growth. 70% feels pretty unprecedented of Deribit's open interest is quite unprecedented. That's, I believe, the highest that open interest level has been, since 9 months ago when these options started trading. And so, super interesting times, and interesting to see the growth in the, U.S. crypto capital markets.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, specifically over here at Tasty, we are seeing the IBIT and the ETH is a very popular option trading product. Obviously, it's one of the ways that retail traders can get exposure to derivatives in the asset class. So it's definitely a very popular product. It was a successful launch, to your point. The fact that it's reaching 70% of open interest compared to Deribit, which is the major spot, option market for sophisticated traders. I think it signals, just an amazing successful launch, and people are interested in this asset class, especially, retail traders. Something else that I found interesting in that research note you put out was that you noted that onshore U.S. traders are buying more calls in Bitcoin versus offshore. There was a big difference or big gap between behavior between onshore U.S. traders and then offshore, in that the onshore traders, with the positioning is much more bullish. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's due to different types of traders, or why do you think that is?
Yeah, great question. I think that Deribit's obviously a super strong counterparty. It's now owned by Coinbase, which is a public company and has very transparent financials. Um, but I think that traditionally, some of these more wingy options that are, would pay out more if the market moves a lot in either direction. You've seen sort of a preference from, traders to trade those on venues that are, the strongest counterparties. Perhaps, CME is a little bit less liquid than these IBIT options, are definitely much less liquid. But something like, a futures, an options offering on CME or, IBIT, options as well. And so I think that, some of these more wingy options that have a higher, payout if the market makes a substantial move, it bodes well with the sort of highly regulated clearinghouse backed markets like IBIT or some of the other regulated venues have. And so, yeah, I think that could be part of it. Perhaps, the US traders also just prefer those structures for various reasons. But I think that, as mentioned, with the counterparty strength has a big piece to do with it.
Yeah. It's an interesting note because I think it's the options market specifically in crypto is a much newer, I guess, tradable product onshore here in the States. So it's kind of interesting to me that people onshore, traders onshore, retailers, speculators, whoever they might be, they're scooping up calls. They're positioning themselves for that, kind of like, big bullish move to 150. And, you look at offshore and you think, at least I thought, maybe they're a little bit more institutional or they're hedge funds that are a little bit more sophisticated. And they're, like you said, they're maybe structuring it as a hedge or they're kind of, doing different spreads that might signal a different, market position. So I think in any case, it shows the demand for crypto options in the States. And to your point, Deribit that was acquired by Coinbase, it seems like we'll get, it'll be a pretty big popular product once they launch spot crypto options, in the coming years, months, whatever it might be. So I just thought that was an interesting thing, point from your research note. Another thing that I want to touch base on was the put call ratio, because you noted that there's a wide divergence between Deribit positioning in that put call and IBIT positions, right? The ETF, Bitcoin ETF. So Deribit, you said, had about a 65% put call ratio and IBIT only 49. Do you think it's kind of the same reasoning that we talked about before, or is it just that two total, I wonder what you think about that. Is it different traders that are doing different things, or because that to me, that put call ratio difference is something to note.
So it's interesting. I was just thinking as well about the fact that perpetual futures are more ubiquitous in the offshore market, and perhaps, a lot of crypto degens might be trading, a 20x perp, which is effectively sort of a similar, payout to an option. If you're wrong, you're going to get liquidated or lose your premium. If you're correct, you're going to, increase, sort of exponentially in terms of, payout. And so I think that perhaps the availability of perpetual futures in the offshore market, as well as, counterparty strength and wanting to trade sort of more wingy options on, US regulated venues that have transparent balance sheets and the backing of clearinghouses, could be the reason for this, delta in the put call ratio. And so, next time we publish one of those research updates, KG and I can come back on the show and can talk even more about it. So yeah, those are great. Got really good pickup last time.
Yeah, for sure. So. I think it's interesting you mentioned the perps market, because I wasn't even really thinking. I wasn't really thinking about that. But to your point, like that type of trader who might be participating in perps, they might be using the offshore trader that's trading perps. They might be using the options to hedge, right? Or that their positioning would be different than sort of a retail onshore trader that's just like, I think Bitcoin's going to 150K. Let me just buy a bunch of calls on IBIT, right? Like, I think it's a totally different mindset and trader behavior that, so I do think there's something there, and maybe there is a trade or something that we can have KG and some of the guys on your research team talk about, or just dig into a little bit more. But I do want to shift a little bit to ETH, because I think ETH has been particularly bullish since the last time we talked, where we've had that run up in July, August. We're still trading at about 4,500 on ETH. The EVIV's at about 65. So are you paying attention to anything in ETH, or even further out, like Solana? Is there anything that you guys are looking at over at Volmex that maybe these like altcoins or coins other than Bitcoin, just kind of paying attention to there?
Yeah, so ETH, over the last couple of months has seen, the inception of several treasury companies, including SharpLink Gaming and Bitmine Inversions. Bitmine Inversions has, I think, accumulated about $10 billion of ETH now, which moved the price from 1,700 or so to 4,500. I guess where it's down to, yeah, 4,500 or so today. And so I think the velocity of these digital asset treasury companies, DATs as they say, has had a big impact on the ETH market. Clearly, I saw a tweet a little while ago about how ETH DApps had acquired more faster and a larger percent of the market cap or the circulating, more than Sailor ever did. And this had a very visible impact on the price, right? Where ETH went from, 2,000 to 4,500. This is a massive move for what is today like a $500 billion market cap asset. You're sort of seeing a similar precedent around some of the Sol DATs, not precedent, but just like similar evolution of like large DATs coming into the market, specifically this DAT that was launched over the last couple of days by Kyle at Multicoin, Jump, and Galaxy, called Forward, or Ford is the ticker.
Ford Industries,
So,
yeah.
so they had bought, basically, raised $1.6 billion and, deployed it into Sol over the last couple of days, actually. Over the weekend, there was some, on-chain activity I saw on Twitter with Galaxy facilitating some of those sales, or purchases. And so, yeah, I think, SVIV is something to track. The 14-day SVIV index is at 71 right now, which seems a little bit low compared to where it's been over the last couple of weeks. So it will be interesting to see how these Solana DATs and ETH DATs evolve. There's obviously a native staking rate with something like Sol, something like ETH, as opposed to Bitcoin, where the yield primarily comes from selling options. And so perhaps, these ETH DATs and Sol DATs employ more DeFi strategies. I believe that's what the Ford company has talked about, is, deploying, borrowing at like a 4 or 5% from like stratified banks and, different sort of lenders, and deploying in DeFi, and, at like a, 12 to 20% rate, which is sort of like a carry trade or an arbitrage on TradFi to DeFi. And so it will be interesting to see what some of these, emerging DATs do. I think, Sailor has less options available for generating yield and creating, yield for investors in MicroStrategy. Whereas if you have the ability to use DeFi, you have a lot more, options at your fingertips. And so definitely interesting what's happening with Sol. Sol's at 235 today. And then of course, Hyperliquid has been, the talk of the town for the last number of months. Hyperliquid is at a $53 billion, FDV right now, just defying gravity, and super interesting to see the growth of, the Hype token, the Hyper EVM, and some of the things happening with Hyperliquid. There's been some DATs in Hyperliquid land as well, I guess, to that point, like Hyperion DeFi, and but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening across just broadly development in that ecosystem as well as, Sol and ETH as well. So, um, yeah, I mean, on my watch list, I of course have BVIV, EVIV, SVIV, but looking at Bitcoin, Ethereum, Sol, Hype, obviously the VIX, and some of the other Volmex indices. So, yeah, great question, Dan.
Yeah, yeah. So I think those are all great points, and obviously I've been following Hype. I think it's been a crazy trade. It really is one of the most successful protocols that has launched. Obviously, the most successful perp on-chain perps protocol, and you mentioned that with this DAT trade or this DAT trend in tokens other than Bitcoin, most of these tokens have a staking and a yield component to it, right? So there's a lot more. There's a lot more that these companies can do, right? There's more, like, they can generate yield easier. They can create different flavors or different payoffs by tapping into DeFi and holding spot on the balance sheet, but tapping into DeFi with the funds traded and creating some type of yield for users, or for holders rather. I think, the one thing that is interesting to me, at least, is how quickly this trend went from like Sailor, Bitcoin to Tom Lee, and now it's completely shifted out to, like, we're getting into Hype. I saw a Doge one, obviously Solana, and I think Solana is a good trade. I think the backers of that Ford Technologies seem pretty. I mean, they're pretty heavy hitters, so definitely paying attention to that, and seeing where Solana price goes. But Hype is one where I think over the weekend or over the last couple of weeks, we've been following this stablecoin thing, USDH. I don't know if you paid attention to that at all, but it's definitely a trade where I think we got more room to run, and the fact that somebody's launching a DAT, or somebody's sponsoring a DAT for Hype. I don't know. To me, it's exciting, but it might signal, maybe altcoin season is here. So definitely paying attention to that.
Yeah, I mean, it goes out farther on the the tail than just Hype. You have things like Sui and BitTensor, and Athena had a pretty successful offering. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely obviously like a DAT mania, but these structures allow for public market equity investors in the U.S. to access crypto assets, and also for the firms and the managers that are running these to have more flexibility over the way they utilize these assets, right? I believe with like so none of the ETH or the Sol, there's like a Sol futures ETF as well. These obviously don't have the ability to stake, and when they do, it probably won't be at full capacity. And so having the ability to invest in a DAT that's able to stake, able to use DeFi, is a lot different than an ETF. And for something like Athena, which is a legitimate project with 10, 15 billion FTV, they're not going to get an ETF tomorrow. Realistically, could make sense to tap into the capital markets in the US and globally via sort of a digital asset treasury company. And so in some cases it makes sense. In some cases, I'm sure a bunch of these will unwind and not work out. But I think it's net positive for the space, and it brings in awareness. And it's interesting, yeah, to see, like, Sailor started buying Bitcoin in 2020. There was a couple other players, smaller players. There was like Semler Scientific, and then Metaplanet was the next one, but it didn't catch on. It's mid 2025 now, and Dat mania is kind of rocking, which obviously looks like a bubble, but it's not. There's a lot of there's like positive facet to a bubble. But yeah, it took a while for the DAT thing to fully ramp up. I mean, Sailor was probably trying to convince people for a long time, but wasn't really going anywhere. So interesting times, and we'll probably see before our next chat. Not sure when that is, but we will maybe see a couple implosions, or we'll have to see what happens with this, Forward Industries, or Tom Lee, it seems like the velocity of, Bitmine, for example, has sort of cooled down a little bit, or Sharplink. I mean, I think Tom Lee was getting a little bit of blowback. I have a lot of respect for him, and he's wildly successful, but his dad had bought like WorldCoin tokens or something, or participated in like a WorldCoin DAT,
Yeah.
and people got kind of annoyed and said, "Hey, like, is this an ETH DAT or what is this?" And so I think there's a lot of open questions about these, how they play out. But there will be a couple of winners, and MicroStrategy just has so much Bitcoin, right? They have like 3% of the entire supply, which is like really wild. So I think that we'll have to see what happens, but there should be a couple big winners across, or maybe at least one across Bitcoin with strategy, but ETH and Sol, and hard to say what happens outside of those. It's not clear that I don't think every asset, of course, needs a DAT. So time will tell.
Yeah, exactly. I think to your point, I generally view this DAT trend as a positive development, right? For access to these other assets, to give investors access to the other assets through traditional equities. But to your point, there's probably a downside, right? Because the further out on the risk curve we get, and the more behind the scenes yield games they play, maybe there is an unwind there, or maybe at some point it's not sustainable. We'll be monitoring that, and I'm sure we'll see BVIV move, and we'll see some of the indices move on these once that happens. But generally, I think it's positive. I think it's a fun trend to watch. It's a fun trade to be in if you're a trader. So I actually built a watch list of all. I've been just compiling all of these DATs that get announced. I think it's interesting that like Sui and like WorldCoin and BitTensor, is coming out with some. So I think that's like an indication to me that, hey, maybe we need to take a pause and take a step back and just kind of see what happens. But yeah, I think it's all generally positive. I think it signals interesting times for the space, and we'll be monitoring it as we go forward. Cole, we got a couple minutes left. I just want to give you a chance to sort of talk about some of the some of the Volmex indices, what you guys have been doing lately, and just where people can find you if they want to follow more.
Yeah. So we have some big plans. We're gonna be getting more involved in the Hyperliquid ecosystem. We are really excited about HIP-3, which will allow for non-standard markets, meaning like not just another coin or token to be listed on Hypercore. And so we have some plans on that front. We have a number of other milestones coming up. We're excited to list on more exchanges. Recently, actually, we launched a collaboration with Bybit, where the BVIV is now the only is currently the only implied vol index available on Bybit, and you can use it to gauge some of their earn products, which involve options. And so we launched some cool collaborations recently. So now BVIV and EVIV are available on TradingView, CoinMarketCap, Bybit's analytics section, and the earn. And we have 4 futures across 2 markets. We have a Bitfinex future for BVIV and EVIV, and a G-Trade future for BVIV and EVIV. And so super excited to bring BVIV and EVIV to Hyperliquid via HIP-3. That's one of the most important and exciting things on our roadmap. We'll be rolling out other partnerships as well. I mean, ultimately, BVIV is this sort of modular, index, which can be, brought into any sort of wrapper. And so, you should see futures, options, prediction markets, all the above, make BVIV tradable. So yeah, follow us on Twitter, VOLMEX Finance, Volmex Finance. Check out our website, volmex.finance. Add BVIV to your watch list on TradingView. Search for Volmex or Bitcoin Implied. You can track it in the CoinMarketCap mobile app or web app. And so yeah, I mean, we have some really cool stuff coming up for the rest of the year. So stay tuned, and great to be here. And yeah, I guess in terms of the trades, I mean, vol is quite low right now, so could be an interesting time to express a view on that. But maybe we talk more about that on the next show, or we'll be talking about that on Twitter as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely want to chat more through that, because I think it is an interesting time for Bitcoin vol and vol in the space in general. but we only got a minute left here. I appreciate you coming on, Cole. Any of our viewers, if you guys want to trade volatility, if you can, check them out on Gains Network, Bitfinex. This is basically crypto's version of the VIX. It's tradable. It's it's liquid. It's getting listed on other venues. You can track volatility this way. It's a very useful. Volmex indices are very useful for tracking what's going on in the crypto market. So if anyone wants to check them out, feel free to hit up Cole, or you can message me and I can get you some information. But Cole, thanks for coming on, man. We'll chat soon, and as always, appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
Thanks, Dan. Talk soon.
Yep.
Cheers.
Bye.